It's a war the Russians tried repeatedly to settle on terms that were very, very beneficial to Ukraine and us. The major thing they wanted was for us to keep NATO out of the Ukraine. The big military contractors want to add new countries to NATO all the time. Why? Because then that country has to conform its military purchases to NATO weapon specifications, which means certain companies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed, get a trapped market. In March of 2022, we committed $113 billion. Just to give you an example, we could have built a home for almost every homeless person in this country. We then committed another $24 billion since then, 2 months ago, and now President Biden's asking for another $60 billion. But the big, big expenses are going to come after the war, when we have to rebuild all the things that we destroyed. Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to spend $113 billion to Ukraine? He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
So he just admitted it's a money laundering scheme. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, said, don't worry, it's not a gift to Ukraine, it's a loan. So raise your hand if you think that that loan's ever getting paid back. Yeah, of course it's not. So why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on? Number one, an extreme austerity program, so that if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to be poor forever. Number two, most important, Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets up for sale to multinational corporations, including all of its agricultural land, the biggest single asset in Europe. In Ukraine, there's been 1,000 years of war fought over that land. It's the richest farmland in the world. It's the breadbasket of Europe. 500,000 kids almost, Ukrainian kids, have died to keep that land as part of Ukraine. They almost certainly didn't know about this loan condition. They've already sold 30% of it. The buyers were DuPont, Cargill, and Monsanto. Who do you think owns all of those companies? Yeah, BlackRock. And then in December, President Biden gave out the contract to rebuild Ukraine. And who do you think got that contract? BlackRock. So they're doing this right in front of us. They don't even care that we know anymore, because they know that they can get away with it. And how do they know that? Because they have a strategy. And that strategy is an old strategy, which is they keep us at war with each other. They keep us hating on each other. They keep the Republicans and Democrats fighting each other, black against white, and all these divisions. You know, Putin every day says, I want to settle the war, let's negotiate. And Zelensky has said, we're not going to negotiate. But Zelensky didn't start that way. I don't want to, belabor the history, but Russia was invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time, Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. They don't want to have Ukraine join NATO. So when the wall came down in the Soviet Union, Europe, Gorbachev destroyed himself politically. He went to Bush and he said, I'm going to allow you to reunify Germany under a NATO army. I'm going to remove 450,000 Soviet troops, but I want your commitment. After that, you will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And we solemnly swore we wouldn't do it. Well, then in 97, Brzezinski was the first in the neocon, said, we're going to move NATO 1,000 miles to the east and take 15 countries into it and surround the Soviet Union. So then we not only move it into 14 new nations, but we unilaterally walk away from our 2 nuclear weapons treaties with the Russians. And we put Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland 12 minutes from Moscow. When Russians did that to Cuba in '62, we came this close to nuclear war until they removed them. So the Russians don't want nukes 400 miles from Moscow. We then overthrow the Ukraine government. In 2014, their elected government, and put in a Western sympathetic government. Russia then has to go into Crimea because they have a port. It's their only warm water port. And they know the new government that we just installed is going to invite the U.S. Navy into their port. So Russia then went into Crimea without firing a shot, because the people of Crimea are Russian. Then the new Ukrainian government we installed started killing ethnic Russians in Donbass and Lugansk, and they voted to leave and join Russia. Putin said, I don't want them. Let's give them protection and give them semi-autonomy and make an agreement to keep NATO out of Ukraine. That treaty was written by Germany, France, Russia, and England, the Minsk Accords. And the Ukrainian parliament, which is controlled by ultra-rightists, and that's a nice way of talking about them, refused to sign it. Zelensky runs in 2019. He's an actor. Why did he get elected with 70% of the vote? Because he promised to sign the Minsk Accords. He promised peace. He gets in there and he pivots. Nobody can explain why, but we know why. Because he was threatened with death by ultra-rightists in his government and a withdrawal of support by the United States by Victoria Nuland, who's leading the econ in the State Department. We told him he could not sign it. So then the Russians go in. They don't send a big army. They only send 40,000 people. It's a nation of 44 million people. They clearly do not intend to conquer Ukraine. But they want us back at the negotiating table. We won't allow Zelensky to go back. So he goes to Israel and Turkey and says, will you please help me negotiate a treaty? The Russians just want a guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO. Zelensky signs the treaty. Putin's people sign the treaty. And Putin starts withdrawing the Russian troops in good faith. And what happens? Joe Biden sends Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, over to Ukraine in April and forces him to tear up the treaty. And since then, 450,000 kids have died who none of them should have died. For every one Russian that dies, 5 to 8 Ukrainians die, and they don't have any men left. You know, we're giving them all these weapons, but they don't have men left. It's a catastrophe, and we look kind of like the aggressor. That's the way the rest of the world sees us.